Welcome to Inclusion Talks. My name is Paul Cisse. I'm the founder of Inclusive CEOs, the National Diversity Awards, and the Inclusive Companies membership. And today we have an amazing CEO from Auto Trader whose epitome and dedication to D&I is absolutely amazing. I've seen him, he's only just come into the post from 1st March. He's always just had COVID to deal with as well. But having worked with him for over a year, he's a real advocate and ally for diversity. He lives and breathes it throughout the whole of Auto Trader, and it's with my great pleasure to introduce it to Nathan Cole.
Thank you, Paul.
So today we're going to talk about your journey, Nathan, within D&I, within your organization, from a personal perspective, and what that means to you. I'm going to ask a few thought-provoking questions and see what your answers are. So do you want to introduce yourself a little bit more from what I have?
Yeah, sure. I mean, as you said, I was recently appointed to the post of CEO at Auto Trader on the 1st of March and had the first task of trying to get us through COVID-19, which I'm glad to say we have, and we've been able to protect our people and make sure that they stay safe. And we've also been able to continue to operate the business. But that's, whilst that's formally the case, I've actually been in transition towards the CEO for probably the 12 months before that. I've been at Auto Trader for 12 years. I actually joined back when it was a magazine company, well, predominantly a magazine company, and I came on board with some new investors to turn it into a digital company, which we obviously completed in 2013. So I've been around Auto Trader for a long time. I've done a lot of a lot of different jobs, mainly focused around the strategy, marketing, product, new business development aspects. And then moving into the COO role, where I had responsibility for day-to-day operations, and that had been the case for about 2 or 3 years. So whilst I'm relatively new to the post, in some ways I'm not at all new to the company, which was helpful when you go headlong into a relatively unprecedented global pandemic.
Well, you look very young as well for a CEO, which is fantastic. And like I said before, I know your journey has been amazing. I know you live and breathe it. You've done various things and talks on D&I, not only for us, but further afield as well. I've actually walked around your offices, and there's actually a fantastic culture within there. I think everybody is accepting of other people. I think it's one of the few companies that I've actually been to where, you know, you actually feel welcome no matter what diversity you actually are. And then some of the initiatives that you've done is being phenomenal. So I'm going to ask you your first question. So do you feel you've been successful in implementing inclusion across each level of employment within your organization? And if yes, how has this been done? And if no, what are your actions moving forward to ensure that this has to be done?
Okay, actually, just before I start that, one bit, if it's okay with you, I wouldn't mind just covering is a bit on my own personal journey as it relates to to diversity and inclusion, which I think is a helpful introduction and puts the rest of possibly what I'd say in context. And I won't wax too lyrical about it, but as you said, I've always been a big believer in equal opportunity, and that society should be a fair place, and it should be a fair place for all the different groups of people and individuals that are within that society. And I'd say my journey on diversity inclusion has been very much a personal one, although Auto Trader has definitely had a lot to it. There's no question that it's fundamentally altered the way that I see the world and think about the world. And whilst in some ways I recognize and actually don't feel particularly good about the fact that I'm probably in the majority and I'm in a position of power and in a position of privilege. When you start to think about D&I, those things can look like bad things, but I think at the same time, it's exactly people like me that need to go, I think, on this diversity and inclusion journey. It's kind of not okay, you know, whether you're talking about race or whether we're talking about gender or sexuality, it's not okay to just hand over to those groups and say, well, why don't you make us more inclusive? It's kind of ridiculous. Actually, it's people like us that set policies, set norms, set accepted social behaviours that really need to get to grips with this. We've got a job to do learn. And I think that's what my journey has been, very humbling in that sense, because you do start to realize how much you don't know about the experience, well, about the world actually, and the experiences that other people have. There's really been kind of three distinct phases. And again, I only run through this because I think it's really important to the questions that we'll come on to later. The first was as a business leader, and Trevor, the former CEO of Auto Trader, was a big part of that. He told a story about a former place where he worked, where he was the CEO, and he was in an office, I believe it might have been in Australia, actually, as it turns out, but it was a global business. And the chairman came into the company and looked at the branch that they'd set out, or that they'd just established, and was doing very, very well in terms of from a numbers perspective. And he leapt on the table and basically screamed at Trevor and said, "What have you done here? What have you created?" Trevor was obviously really, really stunned. And the point he made, then went on to make, is that you've just created an office full of people like you, white shirts, white men. This is disgraceful, and this is not what we stand for in our company. And that really was the start of, whilst I'd always been aware that society didn't really feel fair, that was kind of the start of me really spending and investing the time in understanding, well, what does that mean, and why does it matter? So as a business leader, I obviously started to practice that. And you do get to a lot of the talk around diversity and inclusion. I think you can come from a moral angle. It's just right. It's not right for people to feel excluded. But I think what you discover is we are all different people. And the whole idea of having a leadership team that looks exactly like me, which is what we naturally do if we don't think about it, is actually a ridiculous concept, because I have certain strengths, I have certain weaknesses. And the idea of having a leadership team that all have the same strengths as me and all have the same weaknesses is just obviously a wrong thing. So I think I started with this diversity journey, interestingly, coming from it as much as a business leader and as much around what's the right way to structure a leadership team. And then the next few phases have been probably even more humbling, actually, because I've discovered more about what I don't know about the world. One of those has been having two daughters and seeing that from the very earliest stages of their lives, they start to be given the stereotypes that they've got to play to. Boys play football and rugby, girls play netball. My daughter wasn't, the boys play football. They didn't want my daughter to play football. She asked to bring a football along so she could play football with her friends. And they said, no, only one football on the field. Immediately excluded. There was the Dove campaign for those which actually came at the right time for me, Run Like a Girl. I'm not sure if you're aware of it, but it's a fantastic advertising campaign that really highlights the fact that they ask some girls to do different things, throw a ball, run, and the like. And when the girls do that, their immediate response is to do it in the way that they're told that girls do those things, throwing the ball with a floppy hand or running funny. And when they stop them and say, no, run like you're in a race, they run exactly like any boy would on the video. And to me, that really started to hit home that I'm someone that prides myself on learning and trying to be self-aware and, be worldly aware. And to realize that there's something like that going on in the world around me that I didn't realize really started to get me to take this stuff very, very seriously, because it felt wrong. It's about my daughters. It felt sad and it felt completely unjust. And from there, it's then BAME was probably the next one. Speaking, we had a reverse mentoring session with some of our BAME guild, if you like, or BAME network, where they mentored us about, well, what's their experience been like? And that again just opened my eyes to, hang on, these people are seeing and experiencing the world, thinking about a job application, thinking about whether they go for a leadership development program. Actually, they've had experiences as children and growing up that is just so, you can argue whether it's right or wrong. It just is what it is. And you start to realize that, again, these people, or there are groups of people there that are just experiencing the world in a radically different way. And I mean, that's all been even had a spotlight put on it, if you like, by the events that are happening in America at the moment, where, and actually, interestingly, coronavirus itself, where you're seeing, in many cases, people from black people and people that are within ethnic minority groups are actually even dying at a higher rate
Yeah.
than others. And you start to question, hang on, there's something here that just feels deeply wrong. And for me, that's then cascaded into, well, what about autistic colleagues, and how do they see the world and experience the world? And, you know, we build these organizations for this stereotypical business person. And the reality is none of us are the same anyway. And actually there are big groups of us that have similarities that aren't at all accommodated. And the whole thing starts to unravel, if you like, but in the most positive of ways, where you start to realize that there are people within our organizations and within society that are being excluded by the system, and some, in the worst of cases, even oppressed by the system, if not suppressed by the system. And really, as we come into these questions, that's why I feel passionate about this as a CEO and as a human being, because this is about enabling people to bring their very best version of themselves to work, not feel like they can't be themselves and also be successful at the same time. So it's as much about the battle against exclusion, as far as I'm concerned, as it is the battle for inclusion. And diversity happens to be a big answer to both of those things, especially diversity in leadership.
Yeah, I think I completely agree, Nathan. I've been to lots of black networks in organizations, and I've heard time and time again where their BAME employees or disability employees aren't getting the promotions like their white colleagues are getting. It takes for the chief executive really to be there and hear that message for them to really understand it. Before that, they didn't. And I was at one particular housing association from all across the UK that had the black employees that was there. And we invited the chief executive to that actual meeting. And she did not know that this was the lived experience of these people.
Yeah.
And she made a pact there and then, this is not going to happen in my organization from this day forward. I'm going to make changes. And I know that you personally, from a previous interview that we've done, is that you really like to get to know your staff. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, we have the benefit of being a very large company, I guess, in terms of we are FTSE 100, you know, a market cap of, I don't know, 4 or 5 billion pounds, depending on the day, especially at the moment. But a big company in many ways, but in another way, actually, we're a very small company. We're only about 1,000 people, so it's not tens of thousands of employees like many of the other organisations that are around us in the FTSE 100, which does mean that we can have the benefit of being mostly across 2 offices, and we do get to know each other. We work very much on relationship. We're not heavy on process, bureaucracy. That's not really our style. We're very, very heavy on collaboration. So it naturally means that relationships become important. And I think as a chief executive, it's very easy to view the world through a P&L or from your office. Not that we have offices. We do now that we're working from home, but when we're back in the office, it's everyone's got to fight for a desk just like everyone else. But knowing what's going on and knowing that the things that you think are happening, the things that you think are important are actually happening. I think sometimes the only way of doing that is making sure that you do get around and you know your people and you're listening to your people. I still could do a much, much better job than I do of it, but it's definitely something I try to do as well as I possibly can. Interestingly, something that becomes very difficult actually when you're thrust into the environment that we currently are, where we're all on video conferences, because you just don't get those chance moments or chance encounters where you can just bounce something off someone or catch up or find out how someone's doing. It's all much more intentional now that we're at home and on the end of a video conference all day long.
Yeah. So going back to the first question.
Go.
Yeah, I know that because it was my fault, because I should have done that introduction anyway, but so I do apologize.
No, don't be silly.
Do you feel you have successfully implemented D&I across each level? If yes, how have you done that? And if no, what more do you have to do?
Yeah, so I hope I'm not the only CEO that you interview that says no. I don't think we have. What I would say is I do think we take it as seriously as anyone. I mean, you talked about experiencing our offices. If you came along to the networks, I'd like to think that we've gone further than most companies in really trying to solve the hard issues and do the hard work and invest and giving people the time to really come to terms with D&I and what it means.
Yeah.
But really, to have inclusion at every level, and this is really the point that we're trying to solve at the moment, to really get inclusion at every level, you almost need, I think, diversity at every level. Because until you get, when you speak to my colleagues from any one of the different backgrounds, it isn't necessarily the majority background, whether it's a Black colleague or someone from an ethnic minority group or someone that's disabled, one of the first things that will come up in the conversation with them, or will come up during the course of the conversation with them, is something along the lines of, you know what made the biggest difference to me? It was when such and such was appointed to the leadership team. You know, he was an Indian man, and instantly I felt like, whether I was from a minority ethnic background or Black, interestingly, they started to say, oh, so that makes me think that maybe I can do that. So why would you think that you can't do that? And but you can't change these things. These things are, representation is really, really important. And what we've done is, I think we've done a pretty good job of it at the earlier stage careers. And we've done that through having an early stage career strategy, which says at Auto Trader, we want to try and grow our own. So we're going to bring lots of people in to the organization as graduates, apprentices and the like. We're going to work hard to make sure that those groups of people represent the society that we live in, so that they're diverse. And that does take extra work to do that. There's no question that to build a diverse team takes a lot longer than it does to build a non-diverse team. And then we're going to bring them up through the organization. So we've done that. At the very top of the organization, our board is 50-50 male, female, no BAME representation, but, you know, something that we're very much wanting to get towards. All these things you tend to tackle in waves, don't you? Women represent probably, you know, roughly 50% of the population. We should make sure that we're accommodating them better. The Black and ethnic minority communities represent another big chunk. So we've kind of tackled them in waves, if you like. So we're 50-50 male-female at the board level and 60-40 male-female on my leadership team. So we feel like we're doing okay, actually. I'd like it all to be 50-50, and I'd like it to be, you know, 15 or 13% people from a Black background or minority ethnic, but we're still working on that. Where we've got so much more work to do is, if you look in the middle, in between those two, actually it gets out of whack very, very quickly. Whether you look at gender, whether you look at BAME, whether you look at neurodiversity, sexual preference, all those sorts of things, it very quickly becomes a bit more of the norm that we know. So that's, we've also, as I kind of alluded to, BAME is an area where we've got to do a lot more as well. And actually, as it turns out, and this is only coincidence, we've just really kicked off this in a very, very big way in our organisation this week. So they're the areas that we've got to do more work. And I'd say our mindset is right. We have an inclusive mindset, and you kind of said that you experienced that yourself, but it's when people feel really included, when they all feel like everyone has exactly the same opportunity, and we're just not there yet. And it is about that middle layer, and, you know, we'll come on to it later on, but one of the barriers here is that it's not like there are diverse pools out there for us to go and, you know, you can't just build a diverse leadership team and go, because actually part of the problem is that society is not diverse at different levels. So there aren't the pools to necessarily go into. So you are left to, well, we've got to build these things, but that then takes time.
Yeah. So, I mean, you kind of answered question 2, which was, what do you feel your biggest barriers to full inclusion have been? Have you got any more things to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I did actually accidentally answer it at the same time. I think there are a few barriers. I think the number one barrier personally is about understanding. It's, no doubt you will have experienced this yourself. You get into a room, you do one of the, you know, Myers-Briggs, or you do some other form of personality assessment, and you have that realization, which you seem to forget all too quickly, that not everyone's the same as you. And you don't always necessarily go into, unfortunately, in those sessions, going to understanding, well, why do you feel like that? Why do you think like that? What's been your story? And I think that's really the biggest barrier to really getting full inclusion, is it not being a tick box exercise, and people really understanding that this is about fairness, this is about human beings, and this is about creating environments where everyone feels like they can be included. And the only way to really do that, I think, is people at the top of the organization to admit that they don't know the answers and go out and try and look for some of those answers. And it's not always okay. Actually, I'd say it's very often not okay to just go and find a colleague from one of the groups that you suspect might not be naturally included, and say to them, how does it feel to be you in this organisation and in the world? Because that's actually a deeply personal question, and you need quite a bit of permission and to be able to go there. So you have got to invest quite a lot of time to understand it yourself. The good news is, once you get there, I think the need for action, the urgency, even some of the solutions become a lot clearer actually. The other thing I would say is you do need to allocate resources to it. That doesn't mean, well, it might mean people, it might mean D&I managers, but I think when it really comes down to it, you need to let your people have the time and space to be able to get that same understanding that you do. You need to put together those courses, you need to put together those networks, you need to create the time for people to be able to really come to terms and understand why it's so important to us and why it should be important to them as well.
Yeah, I think having a great D&I team, which you have got in your team with Christos at the helm, it has been amazing, and I completely agree. I'm just going back to a further point as well, as regards to, BAME, and you mentioned you got no BAME people on the board, but and you've only been in post since the 1st of March. How long do you envisage that to change within your organisation? What's your goals on that?
Well, I think as it relates to the board, on all these things, we were very, very aggressive about making sure that we address gender. Not that we just got to the 30% that others talk about. We wanted to get to the right answer, which felt like 50-50, and we went after that quickly. I think in terms of the BAME thing and as it relates to the board, ultimately that is actually a board decision. It's not my decision, but I know collectively as a board, that's something that we want to address quickly. And actually there are targets out there to have that BAME representation on boards, particularly as a public company. Within, I believe it's in the next couple of years. So I think it's the sort of thing that we don't see ourselves, as we start to look to replace or potentially bring on new board members, making sure that we get that kind of diversity will be, very, very high at the top of our list. For me, from the ILT, the leadership team perspective, if you like, that the answer is exactly the same. It's right up there in terms of what does this leadership team mean? It's not about positive discrimination. It's actually, what does our team need? One of the biggest things I need to add to our leadership team is that diversity of thought and background and empathy and understanding of both our people and our customers as well.
I think you hit the nail on the head at one point that you made previously as well, is that there's a lot of people from diverse backgrounds who haven't got the confidence to go for these roles, and they almost have that imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
And I went through that when I was younger, and some of the initiatives that are doing, I'm thinking, wow, why am I here? Am I good enough to do this job? And I think everybody goes through that, but especially if you're from a diverse background, it's prevalent. And how do you overcome that with staff in the organisation? How do you get them to believe in themselves?
Yeah,
I know it's off topic, but I think it's quite key.
No. I mean, interestingly, I come on to it later because it turns out to be the. Sorry, just let me. I've realised people are Slack messaging me at the moment. So yes, how do you get people to build up the confidence? I will come back to my other answer. I don't want to pretend like this is the silver bullet, because I'm sure it's not. But having examples of people like them doing those jobs, that representation in leadership. If we could get, say, someone from more people from diverse backgrounds on my leadership team, then almost instantly people start to think, oh, people like me can do that. So I do think that's a big part. The other thing I would say is it's a lot about leadership development. So our whole leadership development program, our whole approach as it relates to diversity more broadly and BAME specifically, is going to be on typically what our organisation has looked at leadership development programs and the like right near the top of the organisation, so quite close to coming onto the leadership team.
Yeah.
But you really need to be able to ultimately actually reach down to the people at the earliest stage of careers and accelerate them all the way through. So we're actually going to go much deeper with our leadership development program and be much more proactive actually about in terms of the makeup of those programs and what we really want to achieve from a diversity perspective, but also making sure that we're training managers and the people that are running those leadership development programs, who, to be fair, are well ahead of me on this, are very proactive about going out to people and saying, hey, I noticed that you haven't put yourself forward for the leadership development program, but we would have thought you're a perfect candidate. So actually going out to not drag them, but you really need to go out and say, hey, we think you'd be absolutely great for this, and we don't know why you haven't applied. And it's the old thing, you get this with gender a lot, is a male might read a job requirements or a job description, think they can do half of it, and back themselves to do the other half, whereas a woman, apparently, I'm not sure, I can't remember the exact stats, but a woman will look at it, and unless she feels confident that she can do 80% of it really, really well, she won't even apply for the job. And it's trying to counter those nuances. And actually, funnily enough, a lot of people within some of those diverse groups actually do have very similar experiences as it relates to some of those things. They're very different experiences in some ways, but in terms of that confidence and putting themselves forward, that is something that you do need to go out of your way. And I do think a lot of it is about knowing your people very, very well, and making sure you're calling out and looking for those leaders deeper down in the organization, just because the biggest barrier to full inclusion is actually time. Until schools feel more inclusive and fair, until 6-year-olds, my 8-year-old daughter, until those people come up through the organization, we need to find a solution in between to move it quicker than it's currently doing.
As I've said before, you know your staff very, very well, and you're very approachable. And I've seen a lot of organizations where the CEO and the senior executive team aren't approachable at all, and actually sit in a real big bubble, and there's no change that happens there. And I think, your proactiveness within the organization really does pay dividends. And that kind of moves on to my next question with, and we talked about culture change and stuff like that, and I've experienced it myself, and I'm not just saying this because you're here in front of me. It really is a fantastic culture there, lives and breathes throughout the whole organization. So what advice would you give other CEOs and business diversity leaders in order to help them tackle culture change within their organization, and what are the tips that you would give?
Yeah, I mean, I think culture change is obviously a very broad topic, but I think as it relates actually to culture change and D&I think the things I've observed, I wouldn't be so arrogant as to say I have all the answers. I do think we have a fantastic culture, and the reason that we have a fantastic culture really is in no small part because our people have created a fantastic culture. We've certainly set out some principles at the top. We've certainly set out the things that we feel strongly about, and we've driven those home, but very quickly we've handed it over to our people and networks and guilds to be able to put together people that really understand those issues to then take the lead on bringing the organization along with them. So probably the three things I would that have certainly helped me is, one, it is learning. I've spoken a lot about it, but for me, being on our BAME Slack channel, actually just researching what's happening, taking a real interest in, say, what's happening in America at the moment, or how people from different backgrounds are experiencing the world. There is so much content out there. The answers are all there. You just really need to go out of your way to make sure that you find them. You find them yourself. To the extent you can, being able to speak with and have honest conversations with friends, family, colleagues that are within some of those groups and understanding their experiences where you already have that trust built is also hugely, hugely enlightening. And certainly for me, that's made all the difference. And it's a credit to the people that I've spoken to, whether it's many women that have been willing to share with me their experiences, whether it's people from a BAME background that have shared those, or people from neurodiverse backgrounds and the like. So that's the first one, is really learn and get to understand the problem from their shoes. I don't think until you do that, I don't think you ever really will come up with the solutions, but I don't think you really generate that internal urge, I think, as you described from that, the CEO of the Housing Association that said, right, I'm not having that. Because I think most of us, if you really understood it, I think most human beings will say, we're not having that, not here.
Yeah.
So I think that's the first thing. The second thing is, I think then as a leader in an organization, you need to make this a priority and explain why it's a priority, which links to, I guess, the point that I've just made. But this can't be about environmental, social and governance and box ticking to, perform well on some form of social ranking. It's got to be something that's a real human endeavor within your organization. Because I think if any of us, and I'm not sure there are many people that would openly admit otherwise, but if we believe in creating a fair society, and I imagine most big business leaders wouldn't disagree with that for a second, but if we really believe in creating a fair society, then why not start by creating fair organizations? And once you realize that your organization might not be fair, not by design at all, these things have happened over, many, many years, but that has to be a priority that goes well above corporate social responsibility or anything like that. For us, in terms of what I'd like to achieve over the next 3 years, D&I generally, some of the areas we've spoken about specifically are right up there alongside the strategic things that we want to make happen, the commercial things that we want to make happen. And then interestingly, the third observation I've had is the minute you've done that, give it to the people that actually really understand this stuff, give it back down to the ground level and let them drive the change for their colleagues from the ground up. This is where our networks come in, the groups that we have, every interaction I've had with them, every course that they've run, not for me personally, but we had a course on understanding autism where we spent 4 hours. There was probably 30 of us in the room. These things make you a better human. They're really, really important. People, you instantly start to understand the issue, which I think is more important than understanding the initiative to solve the issue. You've of course got to do the latter, but until you really understand it, and the best people to come up with those isn't necessarily some central function. Having D&I managers and the like is of course a good thing, but you really want them to be coordinating those groups within the organization, telling the organization and shaping the organization to make it more inclusive in really, really big ways sometimes, maybe HR policy or the way that you accommodate part-time workers, right down to small things like, I jest, but the number of conversations we've had about inclusivity and toilets within our organization is just unbelievable. But whilst I make a joke of it, there are lots of these things can be small things actually that we, or people like me, will gloss over because that's just the way they've always been done. You don't realize that actually it makes life really, that makes some people just feel a little bit more excluded, and it doesn't need to be like that.
Yeah. So how did you get buy-in from middle management? Because I go to a lot of organizations as well, and sometimes the CEO has all the will in the world, but then when you go to middle management, it quite often falls down. And you have some people that are not on board. What do you do with those middle managers, and how do you educate them, or how do you deal with the middle managers that are not quite pushing the same direction as what you want them to?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're in a pretty fortunate position, but I imagine that those that are not, we've definitely had moments when we've pushed on this D&I stuff where there are people. Actually both from diverse backgrounds and from a majority background, if you like, that say, well, hang on, if they're from a diverse background, they might say, we don't want any unfair advantage of this. This doesn't feel right. So sometimes you get that pushback just as much as you get on the other side. Well, hang on, does that mean we're going to positively discriminate towards these people? That doesn't necessarily feel right and fair. We should just treat everyone the same. And I think, that's one of, certainly one of the lessons that I have learned is that creating fairness and equality isn't the same as doing the same thing for everyone, because everyone is different. And I think this is something that people really struggle at times to get their head around. The only solution that I've got is that, if you've got good people in your organization in those middle management roles, they're not pushing back because they're against creating an inclusive environment.
Yeah.
I think very often the pushback, it's not pushback, it's just misunderstanding about exactly what the issue is. And therefore they don't necessarily know what to do about it. So I think for us, That's why we will absolutely mandate attending D&I courses on the different elements, not on all elements. We don't always say, everyone's got to do a full day on BAME, a full day on neurodiversity, but for certainly we do a D&I course that everyone in the organisation needs to attend. We also embed that into our induction process as well. So I do think, and I know I'll keep coming back to it, but when those people are told by someone that can really explain to them how this feels for some human beings, then very quickly I do think people get on board. But sometimes the time it takes to get from D&I should be a priority to people really understanding, well, why does it need to be a priority? What are we actually trying to solve? Because I think we genuinely underestimate that a lot of these problems persist because they're not talked about and they're not understood by people that are, not in one of those diverse or minority kind of groups.
And actually, Nathan, you're in an industry which is not diverse at all. The automobile industry, you're dealing with lots of car dealerships, and actually, it's refreshing to see an organisation leading the change within this industry. And what do you feel the industry needs to do? Is there any tips that you could give out there just for the industry as a whole?
Well, I mean, it's definitely.
I'll move on to my last question soon, but I just think that's an important question.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I think that we're probably part of two industries, if I'm honest, and they're both not diverse in many ways, which is automotive and technology. So when you talk about some of the barriers to achieving these things, STEM and girls, as it relates to gender, just to take one kind of example, if you try and create a gender balanced technology organization or a group of developers, it is really, really really difficult to do. So I think on the technology side, I think a lot of the solution has to be around early careers and trying to intervene at those school and university levels to tell these diverse groups or make sure these diverse groups of people are actively encouraged and told that this is for everyone. It's not boys are good at maths, girls are good at art. Let's just throw that rubbish away. But it does need to happen at quite an early level. I also think whilst quotas and targets are very mixed, and actually personally, when it comes down to targets and those sorts of things, I'm as big a skeptic as anyone when you look at gender pay gap or ethnicity pay gap and those sorts of things. But there is something in just setting some bold targets as an industry. We're part of the Automotive 30% Club, which aims to get 30% of leadership positions occupied by women within the industry. I do think those things, when taken seriously, ideally with some level of accountability, and whether that's people just saying publicly, we're part of this club, we're aiming for 30%, but by the way, reporting that we're at 5%. So that combination of targets and accountability and having to explain, I think when you get to industry levels, is quite powerful, because the system, the status quo, by virtue of being the status quo, doesn't want to change. So you sometimes need to adopt these targets that are exactly the opposite of what would otherwise happen. And whether you get to the target or not, maybe it's less important. I still think it is important to get to it, but actually setting it and making people accountable for doing something to get towards it. Yeah. I actually do think when it comes to D&I, it is quite an important thing that the automotive industry can do actually, and technology industry as well.
Fantastic. So that swiftly moves on to my last question. We're in unprecedented times with COVID and lockdown. I know it's affected your business for a couple of months now, and you've made decisive actions about what you do within your organization. But I think within D&I, there's going to be a lot of redundancies and a lot of people losing their jobs. And I think D&I has a lot to answer for within the decisions. So what do you think your do's and don'ts with diversity and inclusion during the proceeding and the COVID-19 pandemic are?
Yeah, I mean, I probably provided some of the answers in what I've talked about before, but I would say in terms of do's and don'ts, a couple of do's probably to start with. You do need to be top down about this, but then you very quickly need to switch it to being ground up. I think the other do is, especially actually, this has become very, very true as we go through something so abnormal as the coronavirus has been, that you need to understand and make sure that you have a process or system or people in place such that you don't make decisions on the basis that everyone experiences the world like you, whether that's as a CEO as whether that's as a leader. Because the reality is, if you're either of those two things, you're in a very privileged position and a very powerful minority, and that is not the position that pretty much everyone else in the organisation is in. Now, that can mean that when you're faced with something like COVID-19, like we did, and this will give you a very real example of it actually, and this relates more to, I guess, to social demographics than it does some of the other areas that we've spoken about. But we did have to make the decision to furlough some staff, which many other organisations did. It was only for a relatively small period of time, but it was because our customers closed. There was literally not jobs for some of our people to do, and we weren't charging for our services, and we had no idea how long that would go on for. But we made the decision for anyone under a certain level that we would top up their salary to full, because we recognise that not everyone's can take a 20% pay cut. I took, my pay was impacted by 50%, but let's be honest, mine's a lot higher to start with, and it's much easier for me to take that than to ask the same of someone that's perhaps on £30,000 a year. So you've also got people that are perhaps single and living at home and working from home. Whilst it might be great for me because I see my kids a bit more, I know the same is true for you. I can be home for dinner all the time. Actually, it's isolating and terrible for some people that are in minority groups that aren't able to mix. I think you do need to consider all those things and make sure that you've got a group of people that say, can we just hold on a sec and make sure we think about what the impact of this policy change, whether it relates to COVID or whether it's in the period that comes after that. How does that impact, working mums? How does that impact people that have got essential workers as partners? We need to start recognising that the world's made up of all sorts of different people, and we need to accommodate that as organisations and probably society a bit better than what we have historically. And then the final thing I'd say in terms of do's and don'ts is really being willing to ask for help, because I know very often CEOs are expected to have, those superpowers and the answers to every question, but I don't think as CEOs we do have that. I think we're hopefully about constructing good teams of people that can work out those answers. But as it relates to D&I, especially when you get leadership teams that might not be as diverse as you want them to, you need to ask for help. That's a big reason why I'm an advocate for setting the priority at the top, but then going down, driving it from the ground up, because that's where you can get those diverse people to help you out as a CEO or as an organization, actually, to work out how to tackle this, and also how to understand some of the implications that you might not have thought of when it comes to making decisions about people, policies, and all the sorts of things that we've been tackling through the crisis and will on the other side as well.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think I've been speaking to quite a lot of people in this pandemic, and it's actually affected them, their mental health, quite a lot of people. I'm in a privileged position where I have a family and people around me, but there's some people that have been locked in their apartments or their house by themselves for many months. And I'm really feeling the pinch. And even people that are in family situations or different situations that are, going to find it difficult to get back into work. How I think you've kind of answered that, but are you going to put some kind of support within the organisation for that as well, some kind of counselling and that kind of thing?
Yeah, we have. I mean, the number one thing that we've done is it's not one thing. I'd say our to our credit, our people operations team, and led by Alison Ross, leads operations more generally within the organisation. They have been absolutely fabulous at making sure that we're sympathetic as an organisation. Well, first of all, aware of the different situations that people might fall into and sympathetic. So just now, as we're getting to this stage of the, coming out of full lockdown, we've actually done surveys to find out from every single individual who, of course, fills out the survey, which is hopefully everyone, and I'm reasonably confident will be everyone, to tell us about their story and their situation and how they're feeling. And, you know, that will lead to a whole range of different, you know, I'm not comfortable going outside the house until there's a vaccine, through to my partner's an essential worker. He's working in the NHS. We've got a child that's still not back at school. I can't possibly know how I'm going to be able to work. So we've factored that in by providing a great deal of slack. We said to people, for example, look, we understand that some of you are not going to be as productive. We're still going to pay you the same money, but the same salary, but let us know if you're really not even able to do, say, 30 hours out of the 40 hours, and we'll try and come to some agreement that you feel good and moral about and makes sense for the organisation as well. So it's ultimately about understanding people, which we're doing through surveys, and then working out what's the flexibility you can provide. You can't provide full flexibility to everyone, because at the end of the day, our job is to create a successful organisation for all the employees and all the stakeholders in the business. And that sometimes means you can't accommodate every single point, but you can, you know, there are big groups of people that you can help and support them. We've also, which I never would have thought we would have done, we've got Joe, the fitness instructor, who, when we do talks every week where different people from across the business will present, he'll take people through stretching and the like. We've paid for subscriptions for the Calm app for our people. We've got counselling on hand to support our people. And we've made it very clear, particularly when people weren't working, that we expected our managers to make sure that they touch base with people and their colleagues, just to check in and make sure they do it face-to-face, or as much as this is face-to-face, because you get a different read on how someone's doing from seeing them as opposed to just talking to them on the phone. But there's a whole bunch that they've done. I'd say supporting our employees' well-being and safety was probably number one on the list the minute that we went into the COVID-19 crisis.
Nathan, thank you very much. It's been thoroughly enjoyable, and I think a lot of CEOs can take heed about your stance on D&I. I know you personally, and you've, like I said before, and I'll keep saying it again, there's not many CEOs that have took it to the level that you have in the UK. It's been a pleasure to actually work with you, alongside you, with your staff. And thank you for all that you do. You're a fantastic ally for diversity and inclusion. And may that long continue. And I look forward to continue to work with you and continue to change the narrative with Auto Trader for a long time to come. So thank you very much, Nathan. Have you got any final thoughts before we finish? Or?
Well, the only final thought is to thank you very much for your gracious words. I do have to say, in all reality, I'd like to think that I've been a good ally. I think a lot of the work that we did goes, you know, the credit goes to the CEO that came before me, and I'm very much continuing that work. But the real people that have made the difference, and I'm not just saying this out of a sense of false humility, it really is, all the credit goes to those networks within Auto Trader that represent those different groups of people that have been had the courage and the bravery and the willingness to join these networks and actually speak about their experiences and what the company needs to do differently. I think without that, you know, we wouldn't really be anywhere. So as much as I agree with you about the work that Auto Trader has done, I'm not sure I can take too much of the credit for it, but thank you very much.
So, sorry, just one last question on that. You know, the recruitment of the right staff, I think that's crucial. How did you recruit the right people? What was your decision making in getting a team together that is actually going to embed this throughout the whole organization? Because I know firsthand, they're all passionate about it. It's not just a lip service with them. They want to.
It's definitely not lip service. Do you mean recruiting for the networks, or do you mean recruiting more generally?
Recruiting more generally to have that. Yeah. I know we kind of touch it on the culture, but is there specific types of things that you look for when you are recruiting?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably another 40-minute interview, if I'm really honest.
Well, let's get another time.
No, I think the short answer is, when you came to Auto Trader, you won't have seen posters on the wall about our culture. Everyone might describe it slightly differently. There are principles and values that we have, 6 of them that do define our culture, but it goes much more. It goes beyond that, and I think what we do have is a very strong sense amongst every person as to what our culture is. And when we hire, and this is probably the only basis on which we're not diverse, is we will not we will not employ people that we don't think match kind of our values. Now, that doesn't mean, I kind of joke about the diversity, because we don't want people that don't share our values joining the organisation. It has nothing to do with any of the diverse categories that were spoken to, but we're relentless about that. And every single person that we bring into the organisation, every single person will generally be interviewed or have some interaction with a group of people. So we get that filter and we get that angle on them, but they'll also be interviewed ultimately by one of the leadership team as well, who's then on the hook for making sure that that person is the right sort of person for Auto Trader. And that does include their openness to diversity inclusion. It does include the way that they think about their world and having an open mindset. So I think having had such a strong filter at the start, now that does mean we don't always hire as many people as we'd like. We've had unlimited hiring policies for some of our major roles now for 5 years, and we still can't get as many people as we want because we apply those strict criteria. But that meant that when it comes to something like D&I, when it comes to people setting up networks, we've already got people that are self-driven, proactive, passionate about things outside of, passionate about their work, but also passionate about things outside of work, that, you know, are ultimately human and believe in treating people well and believe in collaboration. So we've kind of been self-selected to be well positioned to have kind of networks of people that are very happy to tell us what they think and what we need to do differently.
Thank you. And thank you for answering that. So Nathan, that's the end of the interview. Thank you very much for the talk, should I say. And, you know, you really do epitomise an inclusive CEO. We shall have lots of series that are going on throughout the next couple of weeks as well. So please stay tuned. This will go on podcast, and this will also go on our website and YouTube channel as well. So thank you very much, Nathan. I hope you enjoy the rest of your time at home with your children, and we'll be back to it soon. And we shall see you all soon. Thank you.
Thanks.